Happy Eastertide, everyone. The Lord is risen. He is risen indeed. In this Sunday series, we have, over the last few weeks, considered how the good news of Easter has been revealed in Scripture, recollected and responded to in liturgy, visually depicted in paintings. This morning, we will give the poets their turn to praise the victory of Easter in rhyme and meter. Or rather, I should qualify that and say that we will give a poet his turn. I have chosen 3 poems from one of the finest poets in the English language. The poet is George Herbert, whose short life spanned the close of the 16th century and the rise of the 17th. I am indebted to 2 very fine interpreters of the poetry of George Herbert. The first is John Dupree and his beautiful book, Music at Midnight, published in 2014. The second is Mark Oakley, the author of taking a line from Herbert, My Sour Sweet Days, George Herbert and the Journey of a Soul, published in 2019. George Herbert was a Welsh-born poet, but he spent his life in England. He was born into a wealthy and an artistic family, and he was a young man marked to go places. As a boy, he was well educated, and his good education led to an undergraduate place at Trinity College, Cambridge. Already, the calling to the priesthood was stirring in his heart and in his mind. But he almost got sidetracked into choosing either an academic life or a life at court. Herbert so distinguished himself at Cambridge, he was made the university's public orator. So he might easily have spent his life as a don at Cambridge, surrounded by his books, his music. He was quite an accomplished musician, and in learned companionship. But then he came to the notice of the king, James I, and he was drawn towards the royal court. He served 2 brief spells in the House of Commons. And yet, the call to the ministry won the day. Herbert prepared for holy orders in what was still a very young Church of England. The break with Rome was not that far removed. He was ordained in his mid-30s and served as rector of the little parish of St. Andrew's Church in the tiny village of Lower Bemerton in Salisbury. He served there for 3 years, only 3 years, until his early death at the age of 40. At the end of his life, age 40, he sent his as yet unpublished poems to his friend Nicholas Ferrer to see what Ferrer might make of them. He said, if they're not any good, burn them. If you think they would be of any value to any soul's health, then make sure they see them. Nicholas Ferrer was leader of a devout Anglican community at Little Gidding, immortalized in T.S. Eliot's poem, The Four Quartets. These poems, Herbert told his friend Ferrer, are about, quote, the many spiritual conflicts that have passed betwixt God and my soul before I could subject mine to the will of Jesus, my Master, in whose service I have now found perfect freedom. Mark Oakley, a very astute interpreter of Herbert, writes this about the poet's spiritual temperament as we can discern in his poems. At the end of the day, the only interesting thing about religion is God. And the refreshing thing about Herbert is that his poems are never about religion and always about God. They are deeply in tune with the human heart and the agitated human mind. At one point, he refers to his thoughts as a case of knives, a case of knives. But each one seeks to explore the nature of a God who can never be the object of our knowledge, but is always the cause of our wonder. This gift, this spiritual temperament, has made Herbert appeal to people of faith across the spectrum. King Charles I read Herbert in prison, and his opposition, summarized in Oliver Cromwell's chaplain, recommended Herbert to his friends. Coleridge said Herbert helped him with his own tendency to self-contempt. Many readers down through the centuries, whether devoutly Christian or agnostic, have found hope in Herbert's poetry and spiritual vision. What is it that makes Herbert's poems so helpful to so many people? A possible answer can be found in an image he places in the first of his poems we shall read this morning, his poem Easter. So let's turn now and read together the poem. Easter. Rise, heart, thy Lord is risen. Sing his praise without delays, who takes thee by the hand, that thou likewise with him may rise. That as his death calcined thee to dust, his life may make thee gold and much more just. Awake, my lute, and struggle for thy part with all thy art. The cross taught all wood to resound his name, who bore the same. His stretched sinews taught all strings what key is best to celebrate this most high day. Consort both heart and lute, and twist a song, pleasant and long. Or, since all music is but three parts, vied and multiplied, O let thy blessed Spirit bear a part, and make up our defects with his sweet art. I got me flowers to straw thy way, I got me boughs off many a tree, but thou wast up by break of day, and brought'st thy sweets along with thee. The sun shining in the east, though he give light, and the east perfume, if they should offer to contest with thy arising, they presume. Can there be any day but this, though many suns to shine endeavor? We count 300, but we miss. There is but one, and that one ever. Wow. In this beautiful poem, the image that gives us a key to why so many people respond so favorably to Herbert's poetry is in the very first stanza of the poem. Sing his praise without delays, who takes thee by the hand. The risen Christ takes him by the hand. Throughout Herbert's poems runs the deep conviction that God is his friend who helps him see himself. God is always a few steps ahead of him, waiting for him to catch up so that they can catch breath and rest together, but in only in order to start off again into some fresh territory. God's anticipatory love for him is this constant source of transformation in Herbert, changing all his hard little full stops into commas. In this love, more than in bed, I rest, he writes elsewhere. Isn't that beautiful? In this love, more than in bed, I rest. Let's look at each of the 6 stanzas in the poem in turn and offer just a few words. Stanza 1. Rise, heart, thy Lord is risen, sing his praise without delays, who takes thee by the hand, that thou likewise with him may rise, that as his death calcine thee to dust, his life may make thee gold, and much more just. This beautiful poem begins with Herbert addressing his heart. Rise, he says to it, rise, because the Lord is risen. Christ's death has reduced Herbert's heart to ashes, calcined, but now his life, Christ's life, will transform it into gold and make it justified. That little word just can also mean tuned well, in tune with life itself. Stanza 2. Herbert, the musician, then speaks to his lute. Here he urges his lute to wake up and do all it can to praise the risen Lord. Awake, my lute, and struggle for thy part with all thy art. The cross taught all wood to resound his name, who bore the same. His stretched sinews taught all strings what key is best to celebrate this most high day. Here he refers to the cross on which Christ died, but as a metaphor to that cross on a musical instrument where wood and string meet. Like those same strings, Christ's sinews were stretched. And here there is a pun on the sound of taught, T-A-U-T, to make redeeming music. But they also taught, T-A-U-G-H-T, all strings to find the higher key of sacred music to proudly celebrate the Lord's resurrection. Stanza 3. Consort both heart and lute and twist a song. I love that phrase. And twist a song, pleasant and long. Or since all music is but 3 parts, vied and multiplied, O let thy blessed Spirit bear a part and make up our defects with his sweet art. Herbert's harp and lute are told to consort and come together to twist a song, twisting into a chord, an accord. Stanza 4. I got me flowers to straw thy way, I got me boughs off many a tree, but thou wast up by break of day, and brought thy sweets along with thee. Here we have a shift in tone. Rather old-fashioned, maybe slightly country use of I got me, allows us to see how in the presence of the risen Lord, we are all, as it were, even if loved ones, spiritual bumpkins or turnips. All of our gifts, our graces, our honors, our trophies, our endowments in this life, they count as nothing as we rise to see ourselves as simply loved by the love of God and for always. Churches in Herbert's time often placed blossoms and greenery all inside the church to celebrate Easter, just as we do today in our churches, just as the altar guild in this lovely church does every Easter. Using a morning image, Christ is up, he's up before Herbert and has already gathered all that is needed for the celebration of the day. It might make you think of Christ walking in that morning garden after his resurrection. And finally, together, stanzas 5 and 6. The sun shining in the east, though he give light, and the east perfume, if they should offer to contest with thy arising, they presume. Can there be any day but this, though many suns to shine endeavor? We count 300, but we miss. There is but one, and that one forever. In the final two stanzas, the poem recognizes both the glory of the rising sun that pours light on the world and the perfumes from the east that we breathe to feel refreshed. Yet, as Herbert tells us in concluding this beautiful hymn to Easter, they all fall short of the new light and the spices that Christ brings. The sun may shine some 300 times or 365 times a year, yet there is only one day that matters, and we live in it and forever. Gosh, what a beautiful poem. The second of our three poems I shall treat a little bit more shortly. I won't go into as much detail, but I want you to see it all the same. Our second poem is Easter Wings. This poem follows our first poem, Easter, in a collection of Herbert's poems titled The Temple. Easter Wings is what is called a pattern poem. It is visually shaped, to look like the wings of birds flying eastwards along the page to the eastern sun. If you could turn the image you're seeing, if you could turn it, the image of the poem, 90 degrees clockwise, you will see how the poem is in the shape of two sets of wings. Notice how the lines in each stanza get shorter and shorter. 8 words in the first line of each stanza, as in Lord who createst man in wealth and store, 8. Then 7 words in the second line, 5 words, then 4 words, then 3 words, then 2 lines with only 2 words in each of the lines, from large to small. Then movement starting in another direction, now 3 words in a line, now 4, now 5, until we are back to 8, and 1 wing is complete. Then at the adjoining wing, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 words per line until the equally balanced wings are perfectly formed. It is a poem of great movement. Each line tells some aspect of the story of man's creation, fall, and then redemption. But it is also very much a personal movement. The poet is telling you the story of his life, born by the grace of God, a sinner, and then restored to life and full flight, grafted into the wing of the ascending, resurrected Lord. In his poems, Herbert rarely refers to Christ's life, death, or resurrection without also exploring what they mean to his own life. Look at that line. Then shall the fall, further the flight in me. He fell from grace, as we all have, sinners that we are, yet our fall was an occasion for God's further reaching out his hand to us in redeeming us, saving us by the death and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. We can relate to smaller instances that tell this movement in our own lives. We may have had an altercation with a loved one. We may be the one at fault. We did damage or we hurt them. They help us, in spite of ourselves, to painfully see our wrong, our need to make amends. This can be tough going. But then there is acceptance and reconciliation, maybe a hard one, but the reconciliation is so deep and honest and cleansing. We are almost, not really, but almost willing to say, had I not messed things up, I never would have known such grace. Then shall the fall further the flight in me. The notion that the goodness which came out of the fall makes the fall worthwhile. It's not an uncommon theme in the theology of the church all down the ages. A most recent example of its exposition is in the book by the contemporary theologian many of you have read, Richard Rohr, who wrote a book published just a few years ago called Falling Upwards. Falling Upwards. In his commentary on Herbert's poem, Easter Wings, Mark Oakley reminds us of another Christian poet, John Donne, who wrote, "Therefore, that he may raise, the Lord throws down. Therefore, that he may raise, the Lord throws down." Easter Wings. This is a beautiful little pattern poem, so rich in thought, theology, and personal confession. But now I want to move on to our third and final poem. This third poem Herbert wrote that I want to share with you is not technically an Easter poem, but it recollects vividly, to my mind, the risen Lord's appearance to his disciples on that first Easter day, on the road to Emmaus, and in the supper at Emmaus, where he was made known to them in the breaking of bread. The poem is simply titled Love, with the Roman numeral 3 following it. He actually wrote 3 poems titled Love, and this is the third, and I think the finest. In this poem, as in the other two, God takes Herbert by the hand. He is invited to sit and taste a meal prepared before him. Herbert sits, and rather than just taste, eats. He eats. If you know any poem by George Herbert, it is most likely this lovely poem. So let's read the poem together. Love bade me welcome, yet my soul drew back, guilty of dust and sin. But quick-eyed love, observing me grow slack from my first entrance in, drew nearer to me, sweetly questioning if I lacked anything. A guest, I answered, worthy to be here. And I, the unkind, ungrateful, ah, my dear, I cannot look on thee. Love took my hand and smiling did reply, who made the eyes but I? Truth, Lord, but I have marred them. Let my shame go where it doth deserve. And know you not, says love, who bore the blame? My dear, then I will serve. You must sit down, says love, and taste my meat. So I did sit and eat. From the very first line of Herbert's poem, we hear the eagerness of love in the short syllables of love bade me welcome, and the contrast with the long and heavy syllables of my soul drew back. And similarly, quick-eyed love is bright and springing in comparison to grow slack. Perhaps some biblical images and stories come to your mind, instances of meals. There's a lot of eating in the Bible, as there is in parish church life. You may think of the parable of the wedding feast when the guests show their hesitancy to come and eat, indeed where they fail to turn up altogether. Matthew 22, verses 1 through 14. You may think of the beautiful images in Psalm 23, wherein the Lord shall feed me in a green pasture, and thou shalt prepare a table before me. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, and my cup runneth over. Or you might think of the Gospel of Luke, chapter 12, verse 37, where God serves at table for guests who consider themselves undeserving. Blessed are those servants whom the Lord, when he cometh, shall find watching. Verily I say unto you, that he shall gird himself and make them to sit down to meat, and will come forth and serve them. Mark Oakley, whom I have quoted frequently in this talk, in his commentary on this poem writes, a universal appeal to the poem is created by Herbert using the word love instead of God or Christ, making the person of faith recall that love is the only metaphor for God which should be pursued relentlessly. It also gets the doubter beyond the loaded word God that may have so many shadows attached to it because of the way it can be used abusively. For the poet Edwin Muir, brought up in a very rigorous Presbyterianism, God was, as he wrote, 3 angry letters in a little black book. But in this beautiful poem by Herbert, love draws nearer. Love sees how the man is pulling away. Love also sweetly questions him, asking 3 questions in the poem, while the man asks only one. Oakley, makes this telling observation in his commentary. You could say here, the tables are turned on us in the way we usually think about God. Instead of a God who is at the other end of our thoughts, a God expected to always answer our questions, as love, instead of answering questions our answers. The poet calls himself unworthy, unkind, ungrateful. He can't look love in the eye. But then there is this beautiful image of God as love, removing our shame, loving us for who we are, not for whom we think or ought to be, and even gently teasing us. Love reaches out to the poet and touches him, takes him by the hand, and then even makes a delightful little pun. Who made the eyes but I? To this, Oakley notes, this is God as friend, not despot. His eyes are full of tenderness. When Herbert gathered all his poems together, hitherto unseen, and before his death gave them to Nicholas Ferrer, he was very careful how he arranged them. And he placed this poem, Love, at the end of the stack. The message was clear. Love must always be the last word. Thank you.